Hello, bonjour, Alberta. Did you know that at least 238,000 people speak français in Alberta? And those numbers just keep on growing? Oui, oui, c'est vrai, it's true. And thanks to Shaw TV Community Access Programming, we get to reach out to everyone to let you know all about special people, places, events, and activities happening right here in this great province, in both English and en français. That's right, mes amis. We begin the first part of our program in English, and then we repeat it en français. So stay with us. Restez à l'écoute.
I'm Anne Boiteau.
And I'm Marc Lalonde.
And tonight we have the pleasure of having with us Francis Wright, who is the CEO of CC4Ms, which is the Canadian Centre for Male Survivors of Child Sexual Abuse.
Thank you.
Kind of a long name, but a short title to remember.
Yes.
And also, we'll be chatting with Alex Cameron, who is the clinical care coordinator for that same organization.
Yep.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice to have you.
So maybe we'll just start asking you a little bit about your background, where you're from. Are you from Calgary, Alberta, or are you from somewhere else?
Well, my parents were in South Africa when I was born, so I was born there. My mother's a Canadian from Saskatchewan, and my father's South African, but when I was 6 years old, they decided it was time to come to Canada, and I'm so grateful. I feel I would have come to Canada when I was 18 anyway, because Canada is a magnificent country, and we try to do something very special but very difficult in allowing people to maintain their individual identities while building the whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And did you speak French when you were a child?
It was Afrikaans. They were just starting to teach everybody Afrikaans at that time.
Okay.
But very quickly, when you come to Canada, you want to fit in. And so I learned English and dropped certain accents and ways of saying things. But through high school, through junior high and high school, I studied French. And when I lived in Ottawa for 3 years, I was fairly fluent. But unfortunately, now that I've been back in Calgary for nearly 35 years, my French has dissipated, much to my chagrin. But.
And Alex, what about you? Are you from Alberta?
No, I'm originally from the Okanagan, actually, and moved to Alberta in 2010 to attend U of C, the University of Calgary, to do my master's in social work. And once I graduated, started working in Calgary and haven't left.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So let's talk about your brand new organization. We can still say it's brand new because...
Yes, it's 4 years old.
4 years
How did it come about?
Some friends were involved with the Theo Fleury Society and wanting to set up a dedicated treatment center here in Calgary. The statistic is 1 in 3 girls will be sexually abused before the age of 18, and 1 in 6 boys. So it's half as much for the boys. And when I was first asked, I said 1 in 500,000, but it's 1 in 6.
That's
in
pretty
Canada,
shocking.
Yes.
In Canada, there are 323 assault centers and 120 shelters for women and children. And some of those do help the men, but in terms of a dedicated treatment center for these 1 in 6 men, there are 4. Victoria, Vancouver, Montreal, and now Calgary. For me, it was an issue of social justice. How could we leave these men who were victimized as children to cope all by themselves? And we thought initially that our contribution would be the provision of free treatment with therapists who were experienced and who were trained. But very quickly we came to realize that there was such a stigma, and the men felt so reluctant to come forward and say, this has happened to me. But healing is possible, so we want the word to get out that please call CC4Ms.
So you're not just the CEO, you're the founder, or one of the
Well,
founders.
my friends and I. You
Yes.
don't do anything by yourself.
No.
So my friends and I started it 4 years ago, and we're so glad to have Alex join us. as our clinical care director. With his background in social work and working with men who were victims of domestic abuse, we have lots of ideas about what Alex can do once he's
Is this an
working
area that's always interested you, Alex?
You know, I haven't really been exposed to it in my life, but you know, the more you get into social work, and I spent years working in Vancouver's downtown east side, and you started to hear stories of what people had kind of gone through and how they ended up in drug addiction and being unemployed and without housing and that, and just seeing where the horrible events that surrounded that. So as I got more involved in sort of the social work, social services aspects, you start to hear more and more and more. Just as Francis said, you think, I haven't heard of this. I don't know anyone who's been affected by it, until you really start to see that so many have been affected by it.
What are the long-term effects of sexual abuse or
For men.
for men?
Is it different than women?
I think it's different for everyone, men or women. So women and men, everyone will have a sort of different effects that they'll experience through their lives as well. So as Francis touched on, a lot of the shame and fear, the guilt, those things that permeate, but also you can see long-term health effects. So people will present at emergency rooms with unexplained abdominal pain or headaches, and that can be traced back to experiencing abuse. You can look at self-harming behaviors, suicidal ideation can be very prevalent. Mental health issues can start to become more prevalent as people are starting to try to make sense of what their experiences have been without having had someone professional to help guide them through the work.
And addictions also, I imagine?
Yeah,
That's how
absolutely.
some of
Addictions
these
is up
things-
there for sure. Because it's that escape. It's that, how do I cope with these feelings that I don't really understand, maybe where they came from, and sometimes I don't have
They
a full
don't always
recollection.
link it back to that.
Absolutely, but there's those feelings that I don't know how to deal with them. So how do I escape that?
So it's not only a crime, but it's a betrayal of trust and love.
Yes.
Because 95% of the time, the child knows their perpetrator. It's either a family member, a family friend, a person in authority. So imagine the betrayal. And then often there are threats. I will kill you, I will kill your little sister if you tell anybody. And then the child feels, well, who's going to believe me? Because often alcohol is done as a precursor. The pedophile grooms not only the child, but grooms the family. And so the family generally loves the pedophile because he's very generous and friendly and helpful. But he says to the child, you know, you are mine. It's a victim of, it's a crime of power, and you're not to tell anybody. And so the child buries it and says, well, everybody else likes him, and maybe it didn't happen to me, I was drunk. And we know the abuse starts between the ages of 7 and 11. We know it generally takes 20 years before the man has the courage to tell somebody, this is what happened to me as a child. And with 71% of the perpetrators are male, 12% are female. And oftentimes when the boy has been raped by the female and he discloses this, he's told, aren't you lucky? Or what's your problem? But he was a child. And an adult having sex with a child under 18 is a crime. And we should say to the man, I believe you, and how do we help you?
Yes. So talking about help, tell us how your organization would help someone that comes forward.
Certainly. So basically, if someone has wanting to engage in counseling or in seeking assistance, they contact us through our website or contact us by phone. Then I meet with them over the phone and we do an intake interview. The intake interview takes about 30 to 45 minutes where we ask questions, and basically what we're trying to do is get enough information that we can get them set up with the right therapist for them. We have 16 therapists under contract, and we have them around the city. So we don't have a central office where people come. We sort of push out to people where they can say, well, I really live in the Northwest, so I'd like to see someone in the Northwest. Wonderful. We'll look at some fitting them there. Or I'd much prefer to speak to a female versus a female. Great.
Versus
so we can
male?
pardon me, yes, male versus female or vice versa. So we want to accommodate those things that are important to them. So we're able to kind of gather a lot of that information through that intake process. And then from there, we try to get someone set up so they're having a first appointment within 10 days of that phone call. So we're really building on that momentum so that they can get in. As we get busier, that might get pushed back, of course, the more success we have, and there may be sort of wait lists. But again, trying to get them started early on once they've taken that risk and taken that chance to make that call.
And you help them financially as well?
We do have financial assistance available for people who, because we don't want the fees to stop people from seeking help. So we are able to assist to a great extent for people who can't afford.
And so where do you get your funding?
Primarily from individuals, from friends, from my dear friends, my husband, and from corporations, from foundations, because we now have some statistics over a year of operation with a professional clinical care coordinator. We are now starting to approach government because we know it will save on health care, it will save on justice causes, it will save in education, because when a boy is sexually abused before the age of 18, there's a high likelihood that they will become involved with the criminal justice system. There's a high likelihood, well, 90% will contemplate seriously suicide. 50% will try suicide. So they're going to end up in our hospitals. So we need to start asking the basic questions. Is there an unresolved childhood trauma? And for many of the survivors, they've never been asked. A friend of ours is John Gill, who established the Southern Alberta HIV Clinic. And he has approximately 1,500 clients. And so when he got involved with CC4MS, he decided to go and ask his clients, how many of you have had unresolved childhood traumas? And he found out that with the men, at least 25% of them had been sexually abused. And these are users of the healthcare system, and they'd never been asked. They'd been prescribed drugs, they'd been told, change your behavior, but no one had ever said to them, what's the original angst, the pain? Have you had a childhood trauma that's been unresolved? So the effects are amazing. And when you think about absentees, women are still absent more than men in employment because we look after the children and the parents, but the men are absent for themselves. And the question is why, and the level of gambling. And
yes.
So if we can help the men, it makes a big difference to companies, to our communities, to relationships.
So I guess you've created through the last few years partnerships with medical clinics and doctors to actually make them aware of this and try and have them ask the question, right?
And what other programs would you have to build the awareness? Because that's obviously where it needs to start, to know that you're there and that it's okay.
Well, when we first began, we knew we had to take some time to assemble a team and have these people figure out what are the protocols, what are the systems, what are the evaluation tools that we use. And so we launched a speaker series that we have 3 times a year called The Magnificent Men. And these are amazing men who are very successful in their careers, but also involved in the community. We don't know whether they're survivors or not. We're not asking them to tell us the story, but they do talk about their careers and their personal life up and down. We had as our introductory speaker Ken Dryden, who was the president of the Maple Leaf Gardens when Martin Druce came forward and said, your building manager has abused myself and 6, 8, 10, 15 other boys. So he was our first. Peter Mansbridge has spoken to us.
Yes.
Frank McKenna.
I saw that on your website, and we encourage everyone to go to the website to get more information. It was, sorry, we're out of time, but very informative, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for doing the good work.
All of you out there, please stay tuned. We continue en français.